What's up guys, you got Crave here, and it's been a year since the release of CDPR's much hyped game following the immensely successful Witcher 3. This is going to be a review and at the same time checking if the initial feedback around the game was too much. On the horizon, the devs are promising quite the amount of content for 2022, which includes the supposedly massive DLC for Cyberpunk and the much expected updates for recent console generations. Now, the recent Steam Autumn sale also resulted in very positive reviews for the game, which does make you wonder if the initial sentiment about it was really valid. If you want the TLDR for this video, basically, you know what the internet can be like. It has a tendency to go nuts for something so small, and despite that, we have to be thankful for it for calling out bad behavior in the gaming industry. Also, the despicable cancel culture is pretty much a thing in some places, and at the same time, it has brought down companies to their knees where they rightfully should be. So, if you want further details on why I said that, let's go over the 5 points which I feel should affect your view of Cyberpunk 2077. CDPR isn't known for making FPS games. In fact, the initial discussion on Cyberpunk was showing that it was meant to have a third-person option like Fallout or Skyrim. If that followed through, it would have been easier to onboard the fans of the very successful Witcher 3. Sure, the game theme would have been different, but adding familiarity will make it easier to draw in fans. There is no denying though that the first-person view forces a certain level of immersion. The opening act of Cyberpunk does this really well. Now, from the moment you get in the face of a gangster in the Street Kid intro, to the authority that talks you down in the Nomad storyline, to the betrayal of Valerie or Vincent, the first-person view really has an in-your-face aspect to it, whether or not you've seen similar plot lines before. This doesn't work well with everyone though, and deep levels of immersion are still attainable with the third-person view. Maybe when VR advances further along, we can laser focus on FPS or first-person view, but for now, I think being able to see your avatars should still be an option. Geralt's character in The Witcher 3 or their previous game was a good example for this one. Even Commander Shepard from the Mass Effect series is another example. Both characters allowed meaningful levels of immersion even though the lens wasn't really through their eyes. I really feel that CDPR missed out on this one. Although, if you've seen some of the footage where the third-person view was forced in Cyberpunk, I think I can pretty much understand why they didn't push through with it. I mean, in those forced footage or those forced views, you would see a missing head, clunky animations. Yep, it was such a mess. Overall though, the first-person view works pretty well, though it's just not to everyone's liking. For this part, let's be honest here that this is one area where the game did things pretty well and at the same time it also sucked pretty bad. Now, when you have the specs to run this game, it looks really amazing. Night City not only looks great after hours, but it also looks pretty good during the day as well. CDPR said that they took part of their inspiration from Deus Ex, and I think that's true in some ways. The world in Cyberpunk is more open, facial animations are slightly better, and the FPS mechanics are tighter. There is more color in the environment, and there is more detail in the world to see. On the flip side, it's also worse. When you compare it to Deus Ex, you could at least see Adam Jensen in cutscenes where V is hardly visible unless you're looking at a mirror, or you're checking out your inventory, or you've reached the endgame. Now, given the Cyberpunk theme of the game, and you get to dress up Valerie or Vincent, I'd like a bit more regularity in seeing my avatar making his or her way throughout the world. When you also grade this game visually from the perspective of previous gen console players, it's, well, horrible. I mean, not only that, CDPR lied. It was malicious on some levels, make no mistake about it. Whether forced by the board or its investors, there was some deception involved. I'm normally annoyed by PC games being made to match the capabilities and setup of consoles, but on this one, I feel for my cousins in the console space. CDPR should have just been honest or announced that Cyberpunk is only meant for the current console generation run. The game also has other concerns that have not been resolved up until today, or at least in the last 2 weeks that I've checked it out. So for example, it still doesn't have the realistic or quote-unquote realistic physics or interactions with things like water surfaces, or you can see cars and NPCs just floating above the ground, or you can see NPCs just gathering or congregating in one spot and facing a corner, just like the mutants in I Am Legend, so you will definitely notice some of the issues. Even with this, Cyberpunk is a great looking game. I wouldn't say that its wow effect was on the level of Crysis when it first came out, nor was it very consistent with the Cyberpunk trailers that were shown to us. I think I can say that it has enough graphical fidelity to really suck you into a Cyberpunk themed world. In terms of the sound design and effects, this is just better than the visual aspect of the game. The main menu's background OST or soundtrack is a great introduction to the world you're about to get into. It has a dark game tone to it that rides on rock themes melded with the cyberpunk flavor. It tells you that cyberpunk's daily life can be messed up for the most part, with drugs, violence, and sex being basically the norm. It's also a world where augmentations are basically an everyday thing, as in the world of Adam Jensen in Deus Ex. Background music is also great when you're traveling from point A to point B without using the fast travel system. You'll have a choice of radio stations, with the Dirge being my favorite. Of course, that's a hip-hop flavored station, so yeah, I like all kinds of music, but in this game, I really like the Dirge. Now, combat music themes are also pretty great, and they match the initial theme in the main menu screen. I'll even say, and I guess it's just me, that the music in combat will remind you of playing Doom when you decide to go through the guns blazing path. Now, a bit more on the sound aspect, voice acting in this game is also top-notch. It matches the effort they did in Witcher 3. In terms of the two voiceovers for the lead characters, I feel that the female V, or Valerie, did a better job in terms of voice acting, but it doesn't really mean that the male version was pretty bad. Other sound effects or sound aspects are just okay, it's just I've heard better in other FPS games. In terms of gameplay, this part will be pretty quick, but the summary is that the gunplay in Cyberpunk is great for a story-heavy game. It's not COD, Halo, not Apex or Doom, but it's still fun. The weight of the guns are there, the recoil is there, the impact or oomph factor for every shot is present. You can play this thing like Doom if you want. Although I do like the smart weapons in the game, especially the very notable Skippy. You'll find that in the game eventually. Now, for up-and-close personal situations, the standard melee weapons can be pretty, underwhelming, but the use of the gorilla arms, some upgrades to your body, or the addition of mantis blades is just pure deadliness. One more thing about gameplay is that you can be stealthy for the most part of Cyberpunk and avoid flatlining anyone, but it's not encouraging like in Mankind Divided. Sure, you have the hacks like System Reset, but the tools and feel of stealth play are better with Adam Jensen, where you can get the Pacifist achievement. On this part, I don't know if it's obvious for all who've played it, but going through the world of Cyberpunk can at times feel like going through the world of the Matrix. In Neo's story, he knew that something was off in the world he lived in. For Cyberpunk, you can see that most places that are there are missing things. If you didn't read up on the news of possible cut content, you'd still get this nagging feeling that something was meant to be in certain places, but it's not there. Don't get me wrong, the main story and some significant side stories in Cyberpunk are meaty and punchy. In fact, the way the main story ends, or the last segment of the game, made me see the game in a somewhat different light. It made me basically just replay the game immediately with a different life path and a different skill setup. I was more thoughtful with certain conversations. I enjoyed my second playthrough more than my first and saw certain stories differently. It's like you see the motivations of NPCs better and further understand how messed up things are in V's world. The problem is when you're participating in some of the open world aspects for Cyberpunk. There are connections to the ongoing theme, but it doesn't feel as deep as they did in The Witcher 3. In addition, cut content is pretty obvious, which really affects, I would say, the value proposition of the game based on the trailers. There are sections of the game that make you wonder, why can't I go there? Why can't I ride the railway system or use the railway system or use that flying vehicle? CDPR mentioned that verticality was the reason, or was one of the reasons, why the horizontal view of the game world isn't as big as The Witcher's. But it does make me wonder if the current game is what they really meant to offer. These are just examples. CDPR encountered development hurdles that much is, out there, as seen in the press content and the leaked materials. I think they took care of the main story and certain side quests pretty well, but maybe the dev issues really just affected the completeness of the overall world of Cyberpunk. So the main question is still whether people overreacted. Unless you were on previous gen console, of course they did. Even if you're on current gen, you have a good PC, I think it's best that we become wary of companies. Remember, their motivations are really just profit, more than anything else. Money makes the games that we like, and they pay the developers. I understand you're not supposed to No Man's Sky everything, and maybe the Cyberpunk devs thought they could pull it off the same way. Now, CDPR in some ways is doing the same thing. It wasn't really polished when it first came out, but it's not on the same levels as Fallout 76. I mean, goodness, I still remember watching the presentation of 76 here on YouTube where they said this and that, and the turnout was just Now again, CDPR tarnished their rep, but not so much that the game, or Cyberpunk 2077, can be considered garbage. It's still a very good title that deserves all the positive reviews it's been getting recently. If you buy it on sale, that's a good and a very smart decision to make. But if you bought it before at full price, I still think, yeah, you still made a good choice. So, thanks for watching this, guys. Talk to you soon.